Welcome to Game Dev Guidance. My name is Joshua Jackson, and I am the lead programmer for Wasteland Warriors, a horde survival game in development by 2DPK Studios. In this video, I want to show you some of the updates I've made to the player controller, as well as where I am at on implementing enemies. If you enjoy the content and want to support my channel, smash that like button and subscribe, then gently tap that bell icon to get notifications when new videos are released. We got a lot to cover in this devlog, so let's dive in. One of the biggest updates I have made on the player controller is updating it to use scriptable objects. This change makes it significantly easier to implement new characters in the future, whether it's different survivors, special unlockable heroes, or even mod characters down the line. Instead of writing a ton of hard-coded logic for each character, or juggling multiple character prefabs, I can now create modular and reusable data assets that define key player properties. Things like movement speed, stamina consumption rates, or even unique abilities can all be stored in a scriptable object, making the system scalable, flexible, and easy to tweak without diving into the core player code. This will be especially useful when adding co-op features, as it ensures different players can have unique abilities while still being controlled under the same core system. One problem I noticed during testing was that in the middle of intense combat, it was sometimes hard to keep track of the player, especially when a swarm of enemies surrounded them. To fix this, I've added an outline and occlusion effect to the player character. This outline is colored based on a global setting in the game controller, which means it can dynamically change if needed, and possibly a customizable option later on. This should help enhance visibility and readability, making it easier to tell exactly where you are on screen at all times. I've added a temporary UI to help track health and stamina while testing. Right now, this UI is just a placeholder, but it serves its purpose by giving clear visual feedback on the player's health and stamina levels. This will be refined further in a future update, giving it a more polished and stylized look that fits the overall aesthetic of Wasteland Warriors. For now though, it gives me a functional way to test balancing, making sure mechanics like stamina consumption and enemy damage feel fair and rewarding. Survival isn't just about fighting, it's also about resource management, and that includes stamina. Now, every movement-based action, whether it's running, dodging, or vaulting, consumes stamina. This means you'll need to think strategically about when to sprint or evade, because if you burn through all your stamina at the wrong time, you might find yourself stuck in a dangerous situation with no way to escape. I want stamina to be a core part of the survival strategy, forcing players to balance offensive and defensive play styles. What good is a survival game without the constant threat of death? The player can now officially take damage and die. I've integrated a death animation and a new trigger parameter in the animator to smoothly transition between states. When your health hits 0, the player will enter a death state, triggering an animation sequence and disabling input on the player controller. Now, survival has real consequences. If you don't manage your health, stamina, and positioning well, you're not going to last long in the wasteland. First up, I've built an enemy spawner controller that will handle spawning all enemies and bosses in the game. Right now, for debugging purposes, all zombies come from the same method, with a simple way to set the initial zombie count. Instead of placing each enemy manually, this system allows me to set spawn points across the map, define spawn conditions, and dynamically control enemy waves based on difficulty, time, or events. This is going to be a key component for enemy encounters, making sure that combat always feels dynamic and challenging rather than predictable. In the future, I'll possibly be expanding this system with different spawn behaviors, like enemies swarming from multiple directions or ambush mechanics. To go along with the controller, I created a spawn zone component that ensures enemies only spawn within the defined boundaries of a spawner. This prevents enemies from appearing in weird locations like outside the map, inside walls, or too close to the player. Each spawn zone can also be tweaked individually, so the designer can control enemy density, placement randomness, and other key factors to make the gameplay feel natural and well-balanced. For the first draft of the enemies, I decided to use scriptable objects. I have a base enemy class that will hold the data inherited by all enemies. So far this includes a name, description, health points, speed, damage, and a prefab for the mesh graphics. Now I can create different types of enemies, like this standard enemy, that inherit from the base class, but can now have additional properties like a custom movement type. This will be incredibly useful as I begin to implement unique enemies such as crawlers, spitters, enemies that explode, buff other enemies, and so much more. Once an enemy gets close enough to its target, it will enter an attack state. By running some simple logic in a script, we determine if the enemy is within attack range and if the target is alive. If these conditions are true, we trigger the attack animation. On a single frame of the attack animation, we sphere cast to check for collision with a player. If a hit is detected, the enemy applies its scriptable object-based damage to the player, causing the player to lose HP and trigger a shader effect to visualize the damage. This method is simple, but ensures that attack timing actually matters. Enemies won't just deal damage by being near you. Instead, the hitbox sphere cast aligns with the attack animation, making dodging and movement an important part of survival. To ensure enemies can move intelligently across the terrain, I've set up a NavMesh surface for the standard enemy type. NavMesh is a built-in Unity feature that allows AI to move efficiently without getting stuck on objects or taking unrealistic paths. This surface defines all the walkable areas, meaning enemies can now find paths around obstacles, stick to designated movement zones, and adjust their paths dynamically when the environment changes. This is a crucial first step towards smart enemy movement, and I'll be refining it as I add more enemies and environment mechanics, such as the structure system mentioned in the previous log. The player controller is shaping up, and with these new mechanics in place, the gameplay is starting to feel more dynamic and engaging. If you're excited to see where Wasteland Warriors is headed, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know what features you'd love to see. I appreciate all your support, and I'll see you in the next devlog. Remember, game development is a journey. See you at the next checkpoint.